Good morning. This is Tim Seldin. I'm the president of the Montessori Council. I'm here this week with Elizabeth Slade from the National Center for Montessori in the Public Sector. I'm here with Ginny Riga, who is a longtime Montessori public school educator, consultant, teacher educator, and researcher, and with Josie Zinninger, who is the founder and co-director of a charter Montessori school in Lakeland, Florida. And we're continuing a conversation that began 2 sessions ago on Montessori in the public sector, its promises and its challenges. This week, our focus is going to be on how effective Montessori schools implement fully implemented Montessori at the elementary level. Last week, it was last week in Hong Kong, as I recall, while we were all there, we had a conversation about Montessori at the early childhood level. And just to recap, if I recall, Josie and Ginny and Sara, who were with us at that week, suggested that it was incredibly important for public and charter Montessori schools to include 3-, 4-, and 5-year-olds from the beginning and to really take advantage of those early years rather than drawing children in at the age of 5 as the norm. There was also a reminder that it was incredibly important to find a way to create economic diversity so that we don't end up, since there are limited funds available to support Montessori in the public sector at age 3 and 4 in most areas of the country. It's incredibly important, if you're going to rely on tuition, to find a way to create a sliding scale or a financial aid program that creates as much economic diversity as possible so that public Montessori is not accused as being elitist and only for those who can afford it. So, welcome everybody, and welcome to all of you who are with us on the webinar for the first time, whether as a panelist like Elizabeth, or whether you are here as a participant for the first time. Just one housekeeping thing. For those of you that are not familiar, on the right side of your screen, you should see what's called a GoToWebinar control panel. The panel is usually a thin rectangle, vertical. There are little lines going across in a sort of a pastel light blue. And there are arrows that are drop downs. One of the things you should be able to see is a tab called Questions. That's where you should communicate with us if you have anything that you want us to respond to, including if you would like access to the microphone. So please, let's get going. And don't hesitate to let us know if you have any questions at all by asking a question. Use the instant message. Now, I am hearing an echo on my end. Let's do a reality check with the attendees. Anyone else hearing an echo?
I hear it. Ginny, I hear a slight echo.
I'm hearing from Nancy and Katie that they're hearing an echo. So that suggests to me, since none of the panelists are using a speakerphone, right? I'm not sure what's causing it. Yeah, lots of people hearing it. All right, the next question then, is the echo annoying enough that you cannot follow what we're saying? Nancy says we can still understand you. I'm wondering whether it's me that's causing it. Wouldn't that be the way it goes? I'm just going to double check my sound. Try to... Aha! I think the echo may just disappeared, but I still hear it. It's not that.
Tim, can you
hear me? This is Elizabeth.
Yes, Elizabeth, I do.
Okay, good.
Good.
I lost sound and now I'm called in through my telephone instead of through my computer. But when I came back on, I heard crickets in addition to an echoing.
Cricket.
Her echo is very
Yeah,
loud
now
as
your
well.
echo is quite extreme. Elizabeth, would you mind logging out and logging back in again? Give that a try.
Sure.
I mean, at least the telephone. Okay, we'll get started in just a second. Let's see. All the participants, Sara is saying maybe we should make sure everyone is muted. And as far as I know, everyone but the participants are muted, but I'll make sure. At the moment, I've just muted everybody. Let's see if there's an echo now. I hear no echo. That means it's someone other than me. And I see that Sara is on. I'm going to unmute Sara. Let's see if there's an echo. This is Sara Suchman, who is also from the National Center for Montessori in the Public Sector. Hi, Sara.
Hello there. Does it sound hear an echo?
No echo. I'm going to unmute Josie.
Okay.
Josie, say something.
Good morning.
No echo
Good morning,
from
everyone.
you. No echo from you. Ginny? Ginny, it says here that you cannot be unmuted until you enter your PIN. And it says I should click to send you the PIN. So I'm doing that now. And I'm going to unmute Elizabeth. Okay. Ginny, you go ahead. Hi, Elizabeth.
Echo?
No, I don't think so. Anyone hear one?
Okay.
And Ginny, we're looking for you to come back online. No, Ginny. All right, well, Ginny, if you're hearing this, you may want to log off and call back in again, okay? All right, let's get going. So the conversation is, what about Montessori in the public sector at the elementary level? Why don't we begin once again with what is Montessori in the public sector? What are we talking about? I see Ginny. She's not saying a word. Josie, how about you?
Okay. Montessori in the public sector can take multiple forms. It can be a school run by a district, such as a magnet, or even a regular public school. It can be a charter. Usually these are all referred to as choices, so schools of choice for parents. Some of them are zoned, some of them are not. They can really take lots of forms, but I think we also discussed several times before that really fully implemented Montessori should look just like private Montessori. There are some challenges that you have to face, but the way that it's implemented and the way that it looks should look like, it shouldn't really look differently in the classroom.
Sounds good. Anything that Sara, Ginny, or Elizabeth want to add?
That was a pretty great description of it. I really like the end part where we're looking for parity with what would happen in an independent Montessori program, that it isn't so obscured by district requirements that we don't recognize it as a Montessori program.
Ginny, you're unmuted now, by the way.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, now we can hear you, although you have to talk a little bit louder.
Okay. I wanted to just also affirm what Josie said, because we have a lot of school-within-school programs here in South Carolina, and I always tell people that once they enter the building and go into the Montessori classrooms and shut the door, there shouldn't be any difference between what they see going on and what they see going on in a private Montessori school setting.
So about a month ago, Ginny, you called me up and you were quite frustrated with the number of teachers in the public sector that you're talking to who are feeling that they're under the gun because of needing to teach to the tests or being worried about the tests or being told that they have to follow some kind of tracking guide. Can you elaborate on that in terms of what kind of challenge that presents?
Yes, that presents quite a big challenge for public school teachers, and it varies from school to school. The schools where it is not a challenge is those schools in which the principal has a good knowledge of Montessori. He or she may or may not have started the program there. We have a lot of principal turnover, so in many cases the principal is assigned to a school that has a Montessori program, and again, it could be a school within a school program, so it might be a mixture of a traditional classes in the school and Montessori classes, but some of these programs, the Montessori classes are there's more of them than the traditional, so some of them are quite large programs. But going back to the principal, if the principal doesn't understand Montessori, then all they seem to hear is the pressure from the district office about teaching to the standards and doing the benchmark testing every 4 weeks. And in the worst case scenarios, giving the teachers a pacing guide to teach the sequence of standards that matches the benchmark testing. Now, it's impossible for a Montessori teacher to use a pacing guide. I think we all understand that in any continuous progress program that's individualized. So fortunately, I think that is not going on, except maybe in one case. But in the other cases, it's really a matter of educating the leader of the school. And some of the teachers seem to have success in conveying to the principal that if they follow the Montessori curriculum, which is what they should be doing, the sequence in their albums, that the standards will in fact be covered. And in our bigger schools, where I've seen the test scores at the end of the year, they're all great. So I think it just takes the principal seeing that a teacher can follow the Montessori curriculum and the standards can be covered. So it is a challenge, but the teacher just has to be committed to doing the right thing. Otherwise, it's really not a Montessori classroom.
So we have our first question came in. Vicki has asked this question from Texas. Is it truly possible to follow our philosophy of a child-centered education following the child's pace while responding to federal, state, and especially district mandates of following the state, she's specific to Texas, the TEKS, the Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills, and their timetable as to when the text must be presented, whether or not the child is ready, and the plethora of testing, ACP assessment of curriculum progress, the 6-week test, and the STAR testing. She says we have a new Montessori school with newly trained, for the most part, teachers who are losing heart as to their ideals when they become Montessori teachers. Our superintendent has now mandated that every teacher post daily on the bulletin board the learning objectives and the demonstration of learning. Wow. Anyone want to respond to a situation like she's describing?
I would love to respond by echoing a lot of what Ginny said as far as leadership being really important in creating a bubble around the Montessori program, especially when it comes to the district. Leadership can not understand what you can say no to, what you need to say no to, what you have to help the district understand about your program and what really makes it a fully implemented program, because if they just want another traditional classroom, that's not why they would be there to begin with. So all of those testing requirements, usually you have to have dialogue with the district about which things are actually required and which things are not. And in addition to that, for the things that are required, trusting in the Montessori process that the students will do fine on those testing instruments. And some of them, if they're every 6 weeks, you're just gonna, if you're forced for some reason, not paying attention to the results and changing what you're doing in the classroom is so important. So again, leadership creating a situation where the teachers can teach Montessori and not have to be responding constantly to district type recommendations or requests or initiatives.
Elizabeth, Sarah, you work. Ginny.
I'm sorry. I was going to say Texas has an association called I think it's called the Texas Association of Public School Educators. And I don't know if this caller is aware of that or involved with that association, but there's strength in numbers, and so it might be helpful for her to, transmit her frustration to them and see if they can intervene as well with the school district.
This idea of working together rather than individually is so important. Vicki, let us hear from you and let us know whether or not you're working with the Texas Association. Sara and Elizabeth, you're at the National Center for Montessori in the Public Sector. You're doing research and you're working, among other groups in the country, you're really working on trying to help support the development of strong public sector programs. Do you have any thoughts about this issue?
So this came up 2 weeks ago also when we were talking about early childhood, about who has the greatest leverage to make the change and to go and advocate for changes in the mandates. And again, I'll reiterate that I know of all of the public Montessori schools, our choice, parents have chosen to be there. And the parents are a very powerful force to recruit and to lobby and to talk at the district level to the superintendent about why they chose the school and what they want to have happen in it.
Thank you, Sara. That's a good point.
I would echo what Sara has said. And
this is Elizabeth. Hi, Elizabeth.
Yes, hi. I think it's very important district by district to figure out what the language is within that district. Most districts have a caveat that's like an alternative program, or they have a name for schools that can exist outside of the strict district guidelines, particularly around assessment and mandated programs like Pearson or Jumpstart, a particular reading program. And finding out what that language is and bringing that advocacy group, whether it's parents or your principal, to have that conversation about how to keep this alternative program running and functioning at its highest level by essentially insulating it from mandates that are going to take it off course. And that's been true in Hartford and in Springfield and now in Boston, that there is language to discuss what's needed by a specialized program like a Montessori program. So figuring out what that language is in your district in Texas, and maybe the organization, the group in Texas already knows that, and using that as a leverage point to ask for what you need. Because I'm with Josie, it has to, and Ginny, it really has to come from the leadership within your building. It can't be left to teachers. There has to be a buffer zone that is happening in order to protect the Montessori programs in the classroom.
Leadership is a really big issue. In a lot of districts, public principals are moved from school to school in a 2 or 3 year cycle. And many a public school that I've worked with has gone into shock as a new principal is brought in who has no real understanding or appreciation for Montessori. There are lots of other examples of people who are wonderful and anxious to understand and anxious to support. But it really does depend to a large extent on leadership. Same thing is true of charter schools. More than one charter school has lost a head and hired an administrator who may be good at doing public school administration, but may or may not understand Montessori. We certainly see public Montessori schools who are unable to get 3- and 4-year-olds into the school in any significant numbers, and are running schools of 200 to 500 that are essentially running either kindergarten classes or K-1 classes. We're seeing a lot of schools that have 2-year age spans at the elementary level and are doing highly teacher-directed programs in classrooms where the Montessori materials are more for show than a real core element of day-to-day life. Workbooks, textbooks, computer-assisted instruction tend to be more the norm. So what do we do about that? Other than parents who obviously, if you get them up in arms, they will indeed go to the mat, from my experience. I agree with you, Sara. That is a key if you could get that.
And when a principal is put into a building, That principal was put there by the superintendent, and the parents need to go to the superintendent. In a charter school, if an administrator comes in who doesn't know Montessori, that administrator was put there by the board, and the parents need to go to the board. And where the teachers can do the educating is in talking to the parents. It's very hard for the teachers to work up, but they can work to the parents, and then the parents can circumvent all the way up to the top.
Another idea I would suggest is, in these cases, is if the school can invite the key administrators, even the superintendent, if they haven't been in the lower elementary classes, to visit and watch for themselves and see how the engagement in the materials is in fact covering the standards. It's not too difficult to watch a child do the stamp game in addition or subtraction or whatever and understand that that correlates to one of the strands in the core curriculum on number operations. And so if they see that this is going on, I think that that helps also. It also helps, too, to find one key person in the district administrative office. And this is usually an early childhood coordinator, an elementary supervisor, and a superintendent for curriculum and instruction, someone in that area. And one more thing, personal contacts really help. Oftentimes there's somebody on the school board that has a grandchild or a child in a Montessori school. And sometimes there are other district administrators that have their children in the public Montessori school. So this can be tapped into as well for advocacy.
Another issue that often comes up in elementary Montessori is that even in the private sector, there's a tendency for elementary teachers to focus on math and language arts, forgetting that the real core of the elementary program is all about practical life, empowerment, becoming mindful in your learning, taking personal responsibility, the social, emotional aspects of the elementary program, and what I would call the tapestry of the cultural curriculum, not just the great lessons, but the interplay of art and architecture and technology and invention, economics and industry and history and science and famous people and philosophy and all of it, how that all ties together, history, geography, anthropology, into forming the web of human culture, the cultural studies. In short, I find that the cultural studies tend to not be that different from what Bill Bennett said many years ago, a thin layer of icing on top of the cake of the basics. Any thoughts about that from your own experience?
I would say over the years, the teachers definitely need to be encouraged that the curriculum starts there, the cosmic curriculum or whatever you'd like to call it, but that's the basis. You start from the big picture and work down to the little details, and the math and the language fit into that and integrate into that, not math and language first and everything else if you get to it. So just reminding them that and working with them, conversating about how are those things happening within the school, and helping them to create a structure that's okay.
Tim, your question is bringing my mind back to something I was thinking of when we were talking about the last point, which is how important it is to have people in public Montessori schools who are bilingual, who speak both district language and also speak Montessori language, because what can end up happening is that it becomes prioritized what the district objectives are, and as you say, that is very limiting and can be reduced to math, language, and science. And having somebody, whether it's a curriculum coordinator or a coach, or if it's the principal themselves, valuing cosmic education and asking about the great lessons and making sure that that those pieces are launched right at the start of the year. When I see that happening, I see there is greater depth and breadth for the subjects that you mentioned, because they're valued. and because people see and understand that those things are expected. And so it doesn't get whittled down and reduced to just this minimal curriculum. It stays at its puffed up, beautiful self. And there's so many obstacles to that. You know, in a number of districts, calling it the story of God with no hands can't happen. Even the creation story becomes very controversial, right? So we have to rewrite and call it the story of the universe. But there's ways to navigate that sort of dual curriculum organization that happens within the district expectations and also what are our Montessori expectations, so that we aren't simply dropping our Montessori expectations and, you know, going right to meet the district ones. So that's kind of my thought, is that it really does come from starting strong, especially in lower elementary, right off, and getting those 5 great lessons really out there, so that, as Josie said, it does then generate this integrated curriculum sense, and all the other pieces that you mentioned, the personal responsibility, the grace and courtesy, the practical life, it all unfolds from there. But if we're starting with a 6-week cycle of testing, and we're, you know, starting with an overview to get everyone's reading level, and we're, you know, we get hijacked, then I think at our very beginning core place, we've lost the opportunity to unfold the integrated curriculum.
Another thing is that that's on our side is that many states don't test science and social studies in the 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade every year. They, of course, like the very first thing you mentioned, they concentrate more on the math and the language arts. But even at Brockman, where I worked, the 4th and 5th grade teachers would be saddled with the year's standards in social studies, for example, were a certain period of time, maybe the 1800s up till the Civil War, and then in the 5th grade they picked up the Civil War and went up to the World War II, something like that. So the way the teachers have done that is they've just they haven't abandoned what Josie has said, but they gear the children to do a lot of their research projects on those eras in time, and weave it into the language arts curriculum by reading novels and also nonfiction about those eras. And I've even seen some of them, for part of the day, swap and put the 4th graders from both classes together and the 5th graders from both classes together to concentrate on that era. Now, I know that that's not Montessori, but you know, I don't think it's that bad to, you know, do a minor thing like that if they need to. But it's just like Josie said, I like the word navigate. You have to navigate it and be creative and committed. And I think that, you know, it's a matter of content. Can the children still grasp the content that's going to be tested in the public schools, but do it in a Montessori way?
I think that's a very good point. Anyone else want to jump in?
I think also it's important, even though teachers have gone through the MACD accredited training, that the leadership is encouraging them as well not to get bogged down, because sometimes it can happen that the teacher is so worried about the standards that they're kind of veering off from the Montessori curriculum, and the leadership needs to come in. And so it's not always the principal that is veering off. They also have to be able to encourage the teacher to stay true to the Montessori curriculum and not, like you said, have 6 weeks of where is everyone, we have to get ready for testing. So that encouragement to stay true to the program.
One of the things, please go ahead.
I wanted to add on to that. This is why it is so important that someone go into the Montessori classes in the public schools and observe what the classroom, make a classroom observation and give the teacher constructive feedback. Whether it's a knowledgeable principal, or if the district is lucky enough to have a Montessori coordinator. When I was at the state level, I did that as much as I could at the 42 sites that we had. But the teachers need to be, I don't like to use the word checked on, but if we do have a teacher that is doing just what our last speaker said, is abandoning the sequence of the curriculum, Montessori curriculum, and teaching to the test, that's got to stop. I mean, somebody needs to talk to that teacher and explain to her and work with her, because that's not a Montessori classroom anymore. And a lot of times parents discover this. And again, they can be ones to make the objection. But I really feel strongly that when we recruit parents, you know, when we have like parent information sessions, when people are making the decision to apply to the Montessori school, you know, we're selling a system of education that they expect to be delivered. And if they go in their classroom and observe that their child is using standardized test workbooks, or you know, they're not using the Montessori equipment, somebody's got to discover that, is my point, because a lot of times teachers get isolated and no one would even know that the teacher is doing this. So observation in the classroom is important, and I find that a lot of principals who do not know about Montessori are afraid to go into the classrooms to observe because they don't feel like they understand what they're looking for and can give the teacher any feedback. And that's something I try to overcome and work on in a lot of different ways in the work that I'm doing now, is educating principals. Conferences, too, usually have one or more workshops on administrative training or even how to observe in a Montessori classroom. So, you know, it's just a matter of getting the administrators to the workshops.
That's true. It's expensive and it's time consuming, and it's not always in the budget of a public or private or a charter school. So one of the things that we've lost, unfortunately, is public school Montessorian. That newspaper was very important, I think, in the development of the public movement. On the other hand, we have people like the four of you who are out there along with your colleagues trying to provide centralized nexuses of support. And you have the foundation that certainly is willing to help try to disseminate and facilitate flows of communication. So we ought to explore over time strategies. For example, one of the things Jackie and I were talking about a few weeks ago with you, Ginny, was possibility of a series of professional development programs that could be offered for people that are either trying to start a new public program or a new charter program, or a series of ongoing professional development for supervisors of educational programs who are coordinators but not necessarily building principals, and of course for classroom teachers. The kind of stuff we're doing here, these kinds of webinars, can be made more and more available if that's something that we sense is useful. And I think that that's something we ought to be looking at more, not only from the individual societies with our own members, but cutting across the board of whether you're part of one group or another group or another group, AMS, AMI, IMC, whatever.
I think that would be very helpful.
Can I just go back a minute to the teachers who are teaching to the stand? I'm going to go back. So I think if we say we're exempt us from this, we can't just say and trust. We need to say this is the way that we do talk about what our students are learning, and this is the way that we can show you what the students are learning. Because if all we have to give the people who don't understand is trust us, I'm not sure we're going to win the battle. But if we have ways of tracking what we observe in the students and communicating what the students are learning and showing what the students are learning, we stand a much better chance of being exempted from those 6-week tests.
And I guess part of that is I don't think there's going to be any public school that is exempt from at least the annual standardized testing,
Right.
which I definitely agree. You have to, in order to get that freedom, you have to show that your kids can perform on that. And I guess the thinking, again, is if you're doing Montessori really well, and again, a curriculum coordinator or the principal or someone is watching that data and making sure that there's ways that the teachers are covering what they need to cover within the Montessori curriculum, that is going to happen, and the students are going to do very well on it. In our particular school, I think the first 5 years or so, our school did better than any other school in the district on that type of testing. So then the district is willing to say, okay, you must know what you're doing.
That's right.
So you do get that trust, but it does come from some of their language, which is standardized testing. And Tim has found a performance series through Scantron, I guess, that is a way that we do assess the students 3 times a year, but it's not obtrusive in the classroom, and I think that's, the teachers aren't teaching to it. It's a way to give feedback and to look at the data, but it's not overtaking the classroom.
What Josie's talking about is formative assessment, and there's multiple strategies for formative assessment, both formal and standardized, and the informal things that every good teacher does all over the world. Scantron Global Scholars Performance Series is the one you're talking about, and the main advantage of that at the moment is we've created a national consortium of Montessori schools. So we have effectively a district nationwide, and we're able to see the data as it's beginning to come in from more and more schools and more hundreds of children. And that data will ultimately be used anonymously as big data by researchers from various universities and groups like National Center for Montessori in the Public Sector and the Montessori Education Research Institute, which is the Foundation's research center. There's another implied issue here, and we're starting to build up some questions that fit into it. Before I read those, let me just clarify what my thought about the next thing is. What is authentic Montessori, or what is fully implemented Montessori, or what makes an elementary program Montessori? Is it buying materials and having teachers who hold a Montessori credential from a MACD accredited program, or can we define it in some way that's beyond that in terms of the day-to-day characteristics that we're seeing in the classrooms? And of course, it's a rhetorical question. Ginny is working with Furman University on the development of instruments. I know the National Center for Montessori in the Public Sector is working on a Montessori rating instrument. The Montessori Foundation and the International Montessori Council have what they call the essential elements of an authentic Montessori program, which is quite refined. There's a lot of data out there, but I think it's an interesting conversation for this kind of webinar, is to ask, what do we look for? What makes it Montessori as opposed to a veneer of Montessori on a conventional classroom?
Tim, just to respond to that question, I get asked that a lot, and what I do is I tell people that objectively there are some, and I narrow it down to 5 usually, that there are just 5 essentials for any Montessori class to have in order for it to begin the path on full implementation. And those are having the teacher credentials for that area, just like you said, having the multi-ages in the classroom, hopefully, ideally, according to the way Maria Montessori defined them, that there be a block of uninterrupted work time, of optimally 3 hours, if possible, or more, and that, and then I tell them the most important one of the 5, I think I gave 4, is that the Montessori philosophy is carried out in the classroom. And that's really the umbrella that I think covers everything else. Now, the reason I say that is because you can have the other 4, but if you don't have the teacher and the assistant carrying out or exuding the Montessori philosophy, which we all know is, respect for the child, child-centered learning, it doesn't matter then if the classroom has the materials, or the block time or the trained teacher. I would also say the teacher's not very well trained if she's not following the Montessori philosophy. So then I go, beyond that to tell people, you have to get into the classroom and then look deeper and see. And again, this really comes under that fifth one of the Montessori philosophy, because that covers with the way the teachers are presenting lessons, the prepared environment, and in the Furman study you referred to, that's where we go into the specifics as we go into the classroom, and we look at those 5 areas of the adult behavior, the learning, the classroom climate, and the prepared environment. And that's where the observers actually check, is there a full complement of materials? They check for the room organization. And then the most important part is they look at the student learning and the interactions between the teacher and the assistant and the children. So it's much more detailed than that. But, to answer your question, that's what I would give as a framework for what is a fully implemented or authentic. Sometimes we use the phrase fidelity to the model. And again, all of this will come out at the end of the 5-year research study. But, we're learning things along the way, and you have to have some standard to hold up to in order to rate the classrooms that we go in. So, I would just offer that as a framework.
The National Center.
Hang on just a second, folks. I'm going to get up and walk away, and those of you who are looking at the computer, you're going to see that I'm gone. My computer's running out of power, so I'm going to go get a power cord and move the computer to someplace where I have internet and power. Keep going.
Does the National Center for Montessori in the public sector have any kind of a document that, like Ginny was talking about, that can be used to rate a classroom?
Yeah, so we have the essential elements, which is more, it looks at it's a rubric, it's a quite fleshed out rubric, and one of the categories is Montessori learning environment, so that would be the one that looks directly at the classroom. There are other things that look at the school, at the leadership, but there is a bunch in there that is directly about the classroom. And there's on our website. You can find it on the website.
Like a rating scale that an observer could use?
Yep, it's a rubric.
Wonderful.
That an observer can use, and it is in constant, it's more finished than it was before. It's still a work in process, but you can see the version that is our most up-to-date in the resource section of our website.
And Ginny, is your research study, are the two working together to see how, reinventing the wheel?
Well, what we did for the research study was I took every rating scale I could get my hands on and worked with Furman to develop a new one that really was an incorporation of rating scales that were used from all sorts of associations. I did use the one from the center, which is a very good one. The center also has a wonderful administrator rating scale as well. Their scale for the classroom is done a little bit differently than the one we're using, because I think they track the number of, correct me if I'm wrong, Sarah, but I think they actually mark the number of times they see certain behaviors going on in the classroom.
So that's a different one. We also have, in addition to the essential elements, which is sort of a school-wide Montessori tool, we have the developmental environmental rating scale, which is specifically for primary classrooms, for 3 to 6 classrooms, and that's the one you're thinking of, Ginny, where you mark the number of times that you see a child redirecting him or herself, or a child choosing freely from the material. And that's the developmental environmental rating scale, and I believe that is also up on our website.
Right. But now, are you saying there's another one that is different from that now, also up on the website?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes, the developmental environmental rating scale is specifically very fine-grained for 3 to 6-year-old classrooms. The essential elements tool is more for a school-wide audit. How are we doing in terms of our movement from infancy to being a fully mature, fully implemented Montessori program school-wide?
Is there anything for elementary?
Not in the same detail that we have for the 3 to 6-year-olds.
But we are starting to work on a document for elementary that's about adaptation. because sometimes students will be coming into a Montessori elementary program without having had the benefit of a full primary experience, maybe none at all, or maybe just 1 year. And so looking at the adaptation into the lower elementary, and how does that work?
And I have a question about fully implemented Montessori at the elementary level in public schools, and it applies to independent schools also, I'm sure. And that is the importance of the third year in the upper elementary classroom, because a lot of public schools, the area middle schools begin in 6th grade, and elementary schools go through 5th grade. And does that, if you can only go through 5th grade, should you only go through 3rd? Or is it okay to have
I'll respond to that one as one of the big advocates of Montessori fully implemented. My argument would be ideally you'd go through 8th grade and you would have your 9 to 12-year-olds in one class. However, in answer to the question, if you're not able to go up through 8th grade and you're going to lose your kids at 6th grade, my advice would be go through 4th, 5th grade rather than not do it at all. The bottom line is there are definite advantages to having 3-year cycles. There are definite advantages to following the cycles that Montessori in general recommended. I would argue at adolescence, the conversation is still out. As we know, with infant toddlers, we don't create 3-year groupings normally. Rather, we recognize that they divide up into developmental ranges, and even if you have kids in the same environment, you're gonna set up the program to recognize the different needs of each stage of development. So I think that the main advantage of a 3-year span is you only have 1/3 of the group normally moving up the next year, and it creates a more stable population. It creates a stronger group of leaders. But in your situation that you described, Sarah, I'd say you go ahead and you do the best you can with the 4th, 5th. That's coming from a real independent school educator.
And Sarah, just to add to that, you know, in where I live, almost all of the public schools end elementary at grade 5. Years ago, they used to go up through grade 6, but now they end at grade 5. Traditionally, the middle school will start 6, 7, and 8, and then the high school 9 to 12. You know, you can't, when you're working in a public school district, you can't change to that, you know, that. So most of our classes are 4 and 5 in upper elementary. The teachers really do say that it does make a difference because they don't have the leaders in the class. It pushes the 5th graders to be the leaders, and they're not ready yet. Mm-hmm. So there's some definite disadvantages. I mean, Maria Montessori knew what she was talking about. And so, but I agree with Tim. It's better for them to continue on from the lower elementary up through 4th and 5th. And then now we have, fortunately, a middle school program where they can pick up for 6, 7, and 8. But most districts don't have a middle school program. And, you know, I think to stay in the Montessori as long as you can is the best thing to do, even though it isn't ideal.
I have a question or two coming here, and if any of you wanted to jump in, please just tell me now, and I'll do that before I read these questions that are coming out. Okay, here's the first one. Albanese cards. Anyone think that Albanese cards are a good part of a solution, especially in a public elementary classroom?
The training program, CGMS, that we send our teachers to, they have recommended that it's a good starting point for a new teacher to have to help them guide them through. So we actually do have that in our program. It helps the teachers to cover what needs to be covered if they're not quite acclimated to many years of Montessori yet.
I agree. I think of them as scaffolding and a prevention from going right to workbook. And I think of them as a beginning tool until teachers get acclimated in really doing the full cosmic curriculum, but certainly not the end goal of where we're saying, well, we have the Albanese card, now we've covered the cultural subjects.
Have any of you found any other commercially produced material that's the equivalent of Albanese, Albanese being the best known and the longest running? Hearing no resounding jumping in, we'll keep our eyes open. At the foundation, we're always looking for things that look like they'll be useful. By the way, I've moved my little orange dog and myself into the toddler environment, and I'm hoping the toddlers aren't going to come in while we're doing the webinar.
Oh, I hope they do.
Well, it could happen. It'll be interesting. While I'm at it, I'll introduce the orange dog. We have a school mascot like all Montessori schools. This is Bikram. Come on over, Bikram. He's not going to come. Bikram is orange for Halloween. You might see him there on the floor. Orange and purple. Anyway, the next question we have from Sherry is, do you feel the Montessori community, if the Montessori community came up with accreditation standards, that public Montessori, and that's where she stops, why can't we set up accreditation standards so we would send in appropriate trainers to make sure that all the Montessori schools are being true to the curriculum? Okay, that's Sherry asking that question. Accreditation is voluntary by definition. We already have accreditation. AMI has accreditation. They call it recognition. AMS has accreditation. The International Montessori Council has accreditation. The bottom line is all of them have to do with authentic Montessori practice. And it's just a question of getting a school to want to voluntarily go through the process.
Although certainly what we've heard at the center was that a lot of what you need to go through in those processes don't apply to the public sector. So things about boards and finances, and they just don't apply, or there are things that are just too hard for the public schools to meet, though some public schools do, so it could just be an excuse. And we have talked about whether there should be a separate public accreditation. It's something we haven't wanted to take on, partly because of this pull between wanting to be inclusive to improve everyone, and accreditation starts to exclude people. But it's a conversation that we have. It's not something we've done. It's a conversation we have.
Well, I can tell you right now, speaking as chair of the IMC, the International Montessori Council, which is a group that prides itself on being inclusive and open to all, we'd certainly be more than happy to take that on and work with the National Center to develop one. And usually when we do something like that, other organizations will quickly follow suit and develop their own. So if you're serious,
Tim,
we'd be happy to work with you.
Okay, we'll talk.
Ginny.
Tim, I just want to add on to that cost. A lot of what prevents public Montessori schools for seeking accreditation through IMC or AMI, well, not AMI, AMS, etc., is the cost. I don't think people understand how limited a budget public schools have, and it's gotten worse and worse every year. So I think I agree wholeheartedly. The center would be a wonderful vehicle for developing that and sending people out to do the observations and all with the accreditation standards. But I think we'd have to keep the cost very low.
I think that's a very good point. I should point out the IMC is the membership wing of the Montessori Foundation, which allows us to keep the dues at less than 1/10 of the cost of an AMS membership. So the accreditation expense is much lower through the IMC. And we have a whole network of voluntary validators that go out like AMS has, and we're able to keep those costs low.
And having recently reviewed several of the accreditation documents from various organizations, I don't see anything that a public school would be difficult or would be any more difficult to meet or should be any more difficult to meet than an independent private school.
I agree. Again, AMS or AMI or IMC.
Right. Back to our original conversation at the beginning, there really shouldn't be a difference in the classroom if you're public or private.
One thing, and I guess I would call it an eclectic accreditation if it comes through the National Center, I think they'd really have to look at this, the quota of, like for AMS, there has to be a certain amount of teachers in the school that are AMS certified. Public schools, you get a hodgepodge. Most public schools have teachers trained by AMI, AMS, METI, IMC, but I think that's where we have to go to MACT. And in the accreditation standards for the school, maybe loosen that to say that all of the teachers have been trained by a MACD accredited association. Because,
I think that, again, if you remember, Ginny, that's how the IMC works, because its focus is on inclusion and not the promotion of a particular training credential. So even though there isn't, so it only costs the school $250 to belong to the IMC a year, regardless of how big it is or small. And the accreditation is very inexpensive. And the bottom line is it operates that way and has that ability to be very flexible for people that represent lots of different traditions as opposed to one tradition. Going on, I've got a different question here, or this is a statement from Vicki. Vicki says, I think a series of seminars like this would be very useful. I'm going to make a concerted effort to encourage our principal to listen to this webinar. Thus far, doesn't say whether he or she has only been to listen to a few AMI lectures, but he doesn't really seem to understand what we are trying to do. Well, thank you, Vicki. That's very kind. So there's encouragement. I see someone from Costa Rica, Sofia Cabral, and she's saying we've successfully and easily implemented Montessori method into our preschool program, but it's been a bigger challenge at elementary since we're accredited by the Ministry of Education. And even though we have more flexibility than if we were a public school, we still have to follow the national regulations and present grades and tests. My question is, how do you still meet those requirements without jeopardizing the whole Montessori program? I'm going to offer my quick sense of that. I think you've got to, at elementary especially, but really at every level, you've got to think about Montessori as being divided into three different rivers that come together. One is whatever are the requirements or the cultural expectations of children at your age level by your state or by your country. I mean, Maria Montessori is very clear about that. You've got to prepare the kids to cope within their country. It doesn't mean you follow the same textbooks or the same sequence, but there are usually benchmarks that countries and states have of what they expect a kid to be able to show they can do or that they know. So that's the first river. Those are basics. Somehow or another, you have to find a Montessori way to get kids up to that level of cultural literacy. We try to do it in a very student-directed way. We try to do it with them having lots of choice, but the reality is we're paying attention. We're really looking to see whether these things are developing, and we're not just ignoring it. The second thing is the second river flowing in is all the stuff that we do that's trying to ignite a sense of wonder and imagination and excitement. Real engagement that gets kids turned on. I don't care if it's science or if it's great lessons or stories of famous people. We're doing a lot of stuff that we never test kids on, but we run them through the experiences because we're hoping, as Montessori described, that if you sow enough wildflower seeds, you don't worry about which ones will germinate. That's got to be as big as your cultural literacy component. Even though the first one, the cultural literacy, is the one that you're going to be tested on and evaluated on, if you don't do the second one, you're not likely to get the Montessori ignition. And the third is kids have got to bring their own interests and questions and imagination and projects to school. Not just stuff we assign them to do and encourage them to do, but the stuff where they're excited about something. They have to know that we love that and we encourage them to do that. And we want to hear what they're interested in, which may be some pretty wacky stuff at times. Those three things together, from my experience, along with really solid Montessori teacher training, the best you can possibly find, and a lot of ongoing professional development for your teachers to learn how to address specific situations that they're facing. Those are the best ways I know for any school, publicly funded or under the scrutiny of a Ministry of Education or totally independent. That's what it seems to take to me to do effective Montessori.
Tim, what about the grades?
What do you mean in terms of valuation?
The caller from Costa Rica said at the national level they are required to give grades to the students.
I've always found grades to be more of a bugaboo than reality. The simple idea is if you've got to evaluate a kid, which to me seems unnecessary, but if you've got to, just make darn sure that it's performance-based and that it's not a one-shot, you know, we covered it, I tested you, you didn't get it, we give you a bad grade and we move on. But rather to look at grades as benchmarks of what you've achieved thus far. I think it's always problematic if you have to follow a conventional model where you have to evaluate kids against each other or against some external standard, and they only get one shot and they only get a certain amount of time to cover it. That's when we leave Montessori behind. And I'd be at the Ministry of Education with all the help I could get from national or international Montessori organizations to try to convince them to loosen up a bit on that one expectation. Anything else, anybody? Hearing nothing. Whoa, we got a lot more that just came in. Hang on. Let's see. Thanks for those of you who are able to stay online. Here's someone, this is from Vicky, and one of her colleagues, John, who's in Dallas, says, is there a central place where public school Montessorians can share alignments of state standards to Montessori? 2, adapting district mandated lessons into a Montessori format, resources for professional development targeted to public Montessori schools. Anyone know the answer to that?
Well, I don't know, Sara or Elizabeth, are you also at the center?
Yeah, we're both at the center.
Okay. Has the center looked into either finding a car already done and making that a resource on the center? Because I think they're floating around there. I think Xavier has done one in Ohio, and I think there have been others, and that question gets asked a lot.
And this is an alignment between Montessori and the Common Core? Is that based?
Right.
No, she's talking about state standards. The Common Core has been done several times now.
Right. So most states, well, many states, and I'm not sure if it's still most, have adopted the Common Core. So if you're aligned to the Common Core, you're set. I don't know who has done their individual states at this point outside of the Common Core. It's certainly something that we could house on our site if people wanted to share it. A problem we've had even with the Common Core is a lot of people who've done it, they're not for public distribution. And so if we put it up on our site as public distribution, so they're for members or they're for a cost or whatever they are. But we certainly have the location and we have the traffic that comes to our site to find them there. And so if people have done state specific, we could put that together on our site and it could be a central location.
Sure.
And I think it also wouldn't be too difficult. The caller asked about showing how to take a standard that is not included in the Montessori curriculum, because there are a few, and how to make a Montessori lesson out of that. And I think pictures would help also. I know some teachers personally that have made lessons on estimation and other things in math, mostly higher level math that may not be covered in the Montessori curriculum. So I think that could be done through this also. It might need a video, but I think that could help teachers.
I think that's
another one was in South Carolina in 3rd grade. It's a requirement to study South Carolina history. So we had materials developed in a Montessori fashion that covered South Carolina history. So I think that would be something. I hope the caller will look ahead, and I think that maybe that's something we should work with the center on providing.
That could be really an interesting sort of instructional video on how to make a Montessori lesson out of something, how to teach something in a Montessori way, make a Montessori lesson out of it. if there isn't a material already prepared.
Right. That's
It
a
also
good idea.
it also sounds like the kind of thing the foundation does for both public and private schools. So it might be the sort of thing we might be able to collaborate on, develop a central conversation for Montessori teacher educators to share. There are some of those things out there. They're generally of very uneven quality. Lots and lots of forums and so forth where people are sharing all kinds of resources, but they're not well organized. They're not terribly sophisticated. They may be working okay in small Montessori schools, but we don't generally see large public schools or large independent schools finding it very useful. So something that might fill the niche of the more sophisticated public or private or charter school, we may be able to collaborate on creating a whole host of resources to help, including podcasts, webcasts, and so forth, as well as samples, PDFs, and so forth. I've got a possible topic for another webinar. And that is from Sophia down in Costa Rica. How do you normalize a non-Montessori child? We've run out of time for today to handle it, but do you agree that that would be a worthwhile topic to address?
Yes.
You interested, Ginny?
Yeah, I think it would be a great topic to address. I think the panel should include some teachers that have been successful at doing good suggestions, though, to include those people on the panel. It's a challenge for both the.
I think we may have lost your sound for a minute. I'm not sure if it's just at my end or across the system. I think you were saying it's a challenge for people. So you were saying a panel that includes some teachers who have successfully done it. Sara, did you hear what the suggested topic for a future webinar is?
Yes, and I think it's a great idea.
Good. Okay. So I'll put out a poll. And Josie, you think it's a good idea?
Excellent idea. It's huge in the public sector to address that.
Good. So what I'll do is I'll put out a invitation to a bunch of friends, including you guys, see who wants to participate. We'll set up a webinar hopefully in the next week or two. So let's see, coming up next week, we're going to have Paul Epstein and I talking about how to set up a public or private Montessori middle or high school. And we'll be talking about, in just 1 hour, the very practical nuts and bolts about program design and selection of teachers and students and all those different kinds of issues, and whet your taste for more topics on that particular issue. I want to thank you, Josie and Ginny and Sara, and now Elizabeth, who I think has muted herself and had to go off to do other stuff. Are you still there, Elizabeth? Sounds like not. I want to thank you all for taking your time and participating with us. So without any further ado, since we have gone about 9 minutes over time, I'm going to end the webinar. And for those of you who stay on board for a few minutes, we leave the webinar open, and those panelists are able to, we debrief, and the audience can listen and kibitz through the text. So I'm about to stop the recording but not end the formal webinar. So hang on just a second. Thank you all. This is Tim Seldin from the Montessori Foundation, wishing you a very successful week and looking forward to seeing many of you at the IMC conference down in Sarasota, Florida next week. Thanking all of you who were with us in Hong Kong a couple of weeks ago, and looking ahead to the Montessori Leaders Collaborative that again meets about a week and a half from now out in Denver, Colorado. So this is Tim Seldin, Josie Zinninger, Ginny Riga, Sara Suchman, and Elizabeth Slade signing off, but not ending our conversation. Have a great week.